In the days when the shadow of Mordor had passed from Middle-earth, yet still the memory of darkness lingered in the hearts of men, there came to the borders of Fangorn Forest a woman whose name was spoken only in hushed tones by the folk of Edoras. They called her Silviana, the Tree Speaker, though none could say from whence she came, nor how she had learned the ancient tongue of branch and root. The Rohirrim who dwelt in the grasslands beyond the forest's edge told strange tales of her coming. They spoke of how she had appeared one morning with the mist, walking from the direction of the misty mountain, her gray cloak bearing neither device nor ornament, her feet bare upon the earth. Her hair fell long and silver as moonlight, though her face bore not the lines of age, and her eyes held the deep green of forest pools, wherein no shadow falls. She speaks to them as a man might speak to his horse, said Elfhelm, who had seen her from afar as he rode the borders of the mark. And by my sword, I swear the trees bend their branches to listen. It was in the 3rd year after the crowning of Elessar that Silviana first entered the depths of Fangorn. The Ents, those ancient shepherds of the trees, received her not with the slow suspicion they showed to other mortals, but with a reverence that puzzled even Treebeard himself. Whom? The eldest of the Ents had rumbled, his bark-like skin creaking as he bent low to look upon her. Long have we waited for one such as you, though we knew not what we waited for. The trees whisper of you in the wind-song, speaking of days when the world was younger, and the voices of wood and leaf were heard by all who dwelt beneath the sun. But Silviana spoke little of herself to the Ents, though she walked among them as one who had long right to dwell in the deep places of the forest. She would stand for hours beneath the great Malorns and the ancient oaks, her hand pressed against their bark, her lips moving in words that seemed to flow like water over stone, melodious and strained. The smaller folk of the forest, the rabbit and the squirrel, the songbirds and the deer, gathered about her without fear, as though drawn by some power that transcended the natural order. Even the wolves of the northern reaches, those gray hunters who had long troubled the borders of Rohan, would slink from the shadows when she passed, their eyes bright with an intelligence that spoke of understanding beyond their kind. As the months turned and the seasons wheeled, word of the Tree Speaker reached the ears of King Eomer in the Golden Hall. The tales grew in the telling, as tales will, until some claimed she could call forth fruit from barren branches or cause withered stumps to bloom anew. Others whispered darker thing, that she commanded the roots to strangle unwary travelers, or that she had made pact with the old forest itself to reclaim the lands of men. "Send riders to observe," counseled Gamling, the king's advisor. "If she means harm to Rohan, better we know it now than learn too late." But when the riders returned, they bore tales more wondrous than any threat. They had found Silviana in a grove where once a great fire had swept through, leaving naught but blackened earth and charred stumps. Yet where she had walked, green shoots pushed through the ash, and young saplings unfurled their first leaves toward the sun. "She sings to them," reported Eothen, captain of the riders, "not in the common tongue, nor in the elvish speech I have heard, but in words that seem drawn from the earth itself. And the trees. My lord, the trees grow as I watched, swift as grass after rain." Yet, for all her strange power, Silviana seemed to seek neither the attention of kings nor the company of men. She dwelt in the deep woods like a hermit, emerging only when the moon was dark to walk the borders of the forest, her hands touching bark and stone, as though reading some vast tale written in the living wood. It was on such a night that she first encountered others who, like herself, bore gifts that set them apart from common folk. 3 there were who came seeking her in the darkness: Maglor, the Wanderer, whose harp could charm the very stones to weep; Nimrodal's daughter, whose name was lost, but whose voice could still the waters and call the dawn; and strangest of all, a woman of Gondor, who claimed kinship with the house of Hurin, though she bore a sword that sang with light when drawn. They found Silviana standing in a circle of ancient beeches, her arms raised toward the star-strewn sky, speaking words in the old tongue that made the very air shimmer with power. "Sister," called the woman of Gondor, and her voice carried clearly through the night. "We have sought you through many lands, following the call of the earth itself. The time of preparation grows short, and the enemy stirs in places where his name is not spoken." Silviana lowered her arms and turned, her green eyes reflecting the starlight like pools of still water. "I know why you have come," she said, and her voice was like the whisper of wind through leaves. "The trees have told me of your approach and of the shadow that follows in your wake. But tell me, daughters of the elder days, are you certain that the one we seek to wake should indeed be wakened? For once roused, she may not easily be sent to sleep again." The three companions exchanged glances, and in their silence lay the weight of knowledge too heavy for ordinary minds to bear. "The time of choosing is upon us all," said Maglor at last. "She will wake, whether we will it or not. The question is whether she wakes alone, or with those who might yet guide her wisdom." As if in answer to his words, a deep rumbling arose from the earth beneath their feet, and the ancient beeches swayed, though no wind stirred their branches. Far in the distance, toward the heart of Fangorn, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the night. Silviana's eyes widened, and for the first time since her coming to the forest, fear touched her features. "Too late," she whispered. "She stirs already, and the bonds grow weak. Come, we must reach the heart tree before the moon sets, or all our plans will come to naught." The Golden Hall of Meduseld had seen many councils in its long history, but none stranger than the gathering that took place in the third watch of the night, when most honest folk lay abed, and only the guards walked the halls. King Eomer sat upon his throne, though his face bore the weariness of one who had been wakened from deep sleep, and beside him stood Eowyn, her hand resting upon the hilt of her sword. Before them stood 4 figures who had come with the dawn, their horses lathered with the foam of hard riding. Maglor the Wanderer bore his harp across his shoulder, its strings gleaming silver in the torchlight. The woman of Gondor, who gave her name as Mithrelas, though Eowyn marked how her eyes would not meet theirs when she spoke it, wore mail beneath her grey cloak, and her sword's pommel bore the device of the White Tree, though worked in a metal that was neither silver nor gold. The third was she who claimed to be daughter of Nimrodel, fair beyond the measure of mortal women, with hair like spun starlight and eyes that held the depths of the sea. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried the music of running water and the whisper of wind in the reeds. And fourth stood Silviana, whom the riders had found at last and brought with gentle courtesy to the hall, though she came willingly enough once she learned of their purpose. "Speak plainly," said Eomer, for he was a man who loved not riddles, even when they fell from fair lips. "These are dark times for mystery, and I would know what brings 4 women of power to my hall in the deep of night." It was Silviana who answered, her voice carrying clearly through the great hall despite its whispered tones. "There is one who sleeps beneath the roots of the world, my lord, bound there in the elder days by powers that are now faded from Middle-earth. She was known by many names. Yavanna, the giver of fruits, was one, though that was not her truest title. The Valar called her sister, but she was older than they, born in the first music, when Ilúvatar sang the world into being." Eowyn stepped forward, her warrior's instincts awakened by talk of ancient danger. "If she sleeps bound, then surely it is well that she remains so. What power could require such binding?" Mithrelas spoke then, and her voice carried an edge like drawn steel. "Not evil, Lady of Rohan, but perhaps something more dangerous. Absolute good, without thought for the free will of those who dwell beneath the sun. She who sleeps would see all Middle-earth return to the wild wood, every field gone back to forest, every stone hall overgrown with vine and root. She loves the growing things above all else, and in her love is no room for the cities of men or the kingdoms of mortals." The daughter of Nimrodel raised her hand, and when she spoke, her words seemed to flow like water over smooth stone. Yet now the binding weakens, and she stirs in her sleep. The earthquakes that have troubled Rohan these past months, the strange growth in Fangorn, the reports of trees walking in the night, all these are signs of her awakening. And when she wakes, fully, she will not listen to reason," finished Maglor, his fingers absently plucking a sorrowful melody from his harp strings. "I knew her in the days of my youth, when the world was new, and the Eldar walked in the light of the two trees. Beautiful she was, and terrible in her beauty, but mercy was not in her heart for those who would bend the earth to their will." King Eomer leaned forward in his throne, his eyes grave. "Then what would you have of Rohan? We are horsemen and warriors, not workers of magic or keepers of ancient lore." Silviana stepped closer to the throne, and as she moved, the torches seemed to burn brighter, casting dancing shadows on the carved pillars of the hall. "We ask for safe passage, my lord, and perhaps the aid of your swiftest riders. There is one place where the binding still holds strong, the heart tree of Fangorn, which was planted in the first days by the hand of Ilúvatar himself. If we can reach it before she wakes fully, we may yet reinforce the bonds, or at the least speak with her and turn her wrath from the lands of men. And if you fail?" The four women exchanged glances, and in their silence lay an answer more terrible than words. Finally, Mithrellis spoke, her hand tight upon her sword hilt. "Then we must do what the Valar themselves would not. We must slay one who was old when the world was young, or watch as every work of civilization in Middle-earth crumbles to dust beneath the roots of her forest." The silence that followed her words stretched long, broken only by the crackling of the torches and the distant sound of wind in the eve. Then Eomer rose from his throne, his decision made. "You shall have your safe passage, and 12 of my best riders to bear you swift as the wind. But know this, if evil comes of your work, be it on your own heads. The mark has seen enough of ancient powers to last a dozen lifetimes." As the women prepared to depart, with the coming of dawn, taking only what they could carry, and leaving their horses for the swifter steeds of Rohan, Eowyn drew Silviana aside. "There is something you have not told us," she said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes, Tree Speaker. What secret do you bear?" Silviana looked long at the shield maiden of Rohan, and when she spoke, her voice carried a sadness deep as the roots of mountains. "The heart tree, Lady Eowyn. It is not merely a place where the binding is strong. It is the very source of her power, the well from which she draws her strength. To reach it, one must pass through trials that test not the body, but the very soul. And at the end, yes, at the end, one of us must take her place. The binding requires a guardian, a keeper, who will watch through all the long years until the world's end. It was always meant to be so." Eowyn's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You mean to sacrifice yourself?" "If need be," Silviana replied simply. "But first, we must see if there is another way. The trees, they whisper of possibilities that the wise cannot see, of paths that wind through shadow into light. Perhaps there is hope yet, even in the dark places of the world." But as they spoke, neither woman saw the shadow detached itself from the pillars of the hall, nor heard the soft footfall that carried news of their words to other ears. For already the servants of she who slept had begun to wake, and their loyalty was not to the kingdoms of men. The riders of Rohan thundered across the grassland as the sun climbed toward its height, their banners snapping in the wind that swept down from the misty mountains. Eomer had chosen his escort well, 12 warriors of proven worth, led by Dernhelm, whose skill with sword and spear was matched only by his knowledge of the wild places where the borders of the Mark met the ancient forest. Yet as they rode, more than one of the warriors cast uneasy glances at their charges. The four women sat their horses with grace, but there was something in their bearing that spoke of purposes beyond mortal understanding. Silviana rode in silence, her gray cloak billowing behind her, her eyes fixed ever upon the dark line of trees that marked the edge of Fangorn. The others spoke little among themselves, and when they did, it was in tongues that the riders did not know. "There is fell purpose in this journey," muttered Guthlaf to his companion Dunhere as they rode. "Mark me well, we carry riders who will bring change to Middle-earth, whether for good or ill." "Peace," replied Dunhera. though his hand rested ready upon his spear. "Did we not follow our lord into darker places when the ring war raged? These are fell times, and fell deeds may be necessary." As the day wore on, their path took them past the ruins of Isengard, that great tower which had once been Saruman's stronghold. The circle of Orthanc still stood, black and impregnable, but around it lay only rubble and pooled water, where once had been mighty walls and furnaces. The sight brought grim memories to the riders, of battles fought and friends lost in the dark years, but as they passed the ruined gates, Mithrellas suddenly raised her hand, calling for a halt. "There is one here who would speak with us," she said, her eyes fixed upon the broken stones. "An old friend, though much changed since last we met." From the shadows of the rubble stepped a figure that made more than one warrior reach for his blade. Tall he was, and robed in gray, but his face was worn with age and sorrow, and his eyes held the weariness of one who has seen too much. Upon his head sat no crown, yet there was majesty in his bearing that spoke of ancient kingship. "Saruman," whispered Dernhelm, and his voice carried both recognition and revulsion. "Once I bore that name," the figure replied, his voice clear, despite the years that had passed since his fall. "But I am Curanir no longer, nor yet the white wizard who fell to shadow. I am diminished, stripped of much that once was mine, yet I remain, and I have learned wisdom, perhaps, in my exile." Silviana dismounted from her horse and approached the fallen wizard, showing neither fear nor hatred. "Why do you linger here, in the ruins of your ambition?" she asked gently. "Surely there are fairer places where you might spend your remaining years." Saruman smiled, and there was genuine warmth in the expression, though touched with infinite sadness. "Because here I remember what I was and what I became, and in that remembering lies the seed of what I might yet be. But I did not reveal myself to speak of my own fate. I know your purpose, Tree Speaker, and I would offer what aid I may." The riders stirred uneasily, for they had heard tales of Saruman's persuasive tongue, and how it had led many astray in the dark years. But Maglor dismounted as well, his ancient eyes studying the fallen wizard with interest. "Speak then, Curanir that was. What aid could you offer, who once sought to claim the forests for your own?" "Knowledge," Saruman replied simply. "I know the way to the Heart Tree, for I sought it once in my pride, thinking to bend its power to my will. I failed, as was fitting, but I learned much in that failure. The path is treacherous, and there are guardians upon it that will test you in ways you do not expect." He gestured toward the dark mass of Fangorn, visible now as more than a line upon the horizon. "The forest remembers all who enter it, and it judges according to laws older than the coming of the firstborn to Middle-earth. Some it welcomes, some it suffers to pass, and some," he paused, his eyes growing distant, "some it devours utterly, leaving not even bones to mark their passing." The daughter of Nimrodel spoke then, her voice like silver bells in the wind. "What would you ask in return for this knowledge?" "Nothing," Saruman replied, and his voice carried such conviction that even the suspicious riders began to ease their grips upon their weapons. "I have learned that some debts cannot be repaid, only passed forward. If there is wisdom I have gained in my long exile, let it serve a purpose greater than my own ambition." For long moments, the four women conferred in whispered words, while the riders waited and watched the sun sink lower toward the western hills. Finally, Silviana turned back to the fallen wizard. "Come then, if you will, but know that the path we walk leads to ends that none can foresee, and we can promise no safe return." Saruman bowed deeply, and when he straightened, there was something in his bearing that reminded those who watched of the great wizard he had once been, before pride and the desire for power had led him astray. "I seek no safe return, lady. I seek only the chance to make some small amends for the harm I have caused. If death waits at the end of this road, at least let it be a death that serves the light." And so their company was increased by one, though the riders of Rohan muttered among themselves at this strange addition to their number. As they made camp that night beneath the stars, with the wall of Fangorn looming dark against the sky, More than one warrior slept ill, plagued by dreams of ancient powers stirring in the deep places of the earth. But Silviana did not sleep at all. She stood watch through the long hours of darkness, her hand pressed against the bark of a young oak that grew beside their camping place. And those with keen ears might have heard her whispering to the tree in words that seemed to flow like water over stone, while high above, the stars wheeled in their courses and the wind brought strange scents from the depths of the ancient forest. With the first light of dawn, the company stood at the very eaves of Fangorn Forest, where the grasslands of Rohan gave way to shadows deeper than any natural wood should hold. The trees here grew close together, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy so thick that the morning sun barely touched the forest floor. Moss hung like ancient tapestries from the boughs, and the very air seemed to whisper with voices just beyond the reach of understanding. Dernhelm and his riders drew rein at the forest's edge, for they knew well the reputation of the place. Tales were told in the Mark of Riders, who had entered Fangorn in pursuit of raiders or wolves, only to emerge days later with their minds clouded and their memories strained, speaking of paths that led in circles and trees that moved when no wind stirred their branches. "Here we must part ways," said Silviana, dismounting from her horse and gathering her simple pack. "The forest suffers no great company to pass its threshold, and horses will find no sure footing on the paths we must take." Dernhelm nodded grimly, though his eyes showed reluctance to leave his charges in such a place. "We shall wait 3 days at the borders," he said. "If you do not return by then, we ride back to Edoras with word of your fate." "Make it 7 days," counseled Saruman, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won experience. Time moves strangely in the deep woods, and what seems like hours within may be days without. The 4 women and the fallen wizard gathered their supplies and stood ready to enter the forest. But as they prepared to cross the threshold, a deep rumbling arose from the earth beneath their feet, and the great trees swayed, though no wind moved their branches. "She grows restless," murmured Mithrellis, her hand instinctively finding her sword hilt. "The binding weakens more swiftly than we hoped." Silviana placed her palm against the nearest tree, a great beech whose trunk was as wide as a horse's length. For a moment, she stood thus, her eyes closed, her lips moving in words that seemed to flow like sap through bark. Then she stepped back, her face grave. "The trees speak of disturbance in the deep places," she said. "Something moved that has not stirred for centuries. We must make haste, yet carefully. The forest will test us at every step, and failure means more than death." They passed beneath the shadowy eaves, and at once the world changed around them. The sounds of the grasslands, wind through grass, the distant calls of birds, the stamping of horses faded, as though muffled by a great hand. In their place came new sounds, the creak and groan of ancient wood, the whisper of leaves, though no breeze stirred them, and beneath it all, a rhythm like the slow beating of a vast heart. The path they followed was narrow and winding, barely visible in the dim green light that filtered through the canopy above. Roots crossed it at every step, some small enough to step over, others so massive that they formed natural bridges high overhead. The very air was thick with the scent of growing things, of moss and loam, and the sweet decay that feeds new life. As they walked, Saruman spoke in low tones of the dangers they might face. "The forest remembers," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It recalls every footstep, every word, every intention of those who enter its domain. There are groves where time runs backward, and clearings where the unwary may find themselves living the same hour over and over until madness takes them. Beware especially the singing trees. Their music is sweet beyond measure, but those who listen too long forget their purpose and remain forever, becoming part of the forest's dream." Maglor nodded grimly, his musician's ear already detecting strange harmonies in the whisper of the wind through the branches. "I have heard such songs before, in the elder days when the world was young. Beautiful they are, and terrible, for they sing of the time before time, when all the world was forest and song. As the day wore on, though day and night had little meaning in the depths of the wood, they passed through groves of trees that seemed older than the mountains themselves. Great oaks with trunks like towers, elms whose branches could have sheltered entire villages, and alders whose roots delved so deep that they seemed to touch the very foundations of the world. In one clearing, they found a circle of standing stone, carved with runes that predated even the Elder Day. The daughter of Nimrodel studied them with eyes that held the memory of ancient learning. "These mark a place of power," she said softly, "a confluence where the streams of the earth's strength meet and mingle. We are on the right path, but also in great danger. Such places are often guarded." As if summoned by her words, shapes began to emerge from the shadows between the trees. They were not orcs or wolves or any creature that walked in the sunlight, but beings of bark and branch, moss and vine, shaped like men but clearly other than mortal. Their eyes glowed with the green fire of deep forest pool, and when they moved, it was with the slow deliberation of trees bending in a mighty wind. "Entwives," breathed Silviana, wonder and recognition mingling in her voice. "I had thought them lost, beyond recall." The leader of the tree women stepped forward, her form shifting between human shape and the semblance of a great willow. When she spoke, her voice was like the rustle of leaves in autumn wind. "Lost we were, tree speaker, but not beyond recall. She who sleeps has called to us in dream, and we have awakened to serve her will. Turn back now, while yet you may, for the path ahead leads only to sorrow." But Silviana stood her ground, though the others readied themselves for battle. "I know your heart, sister of branch and root. You serve not her will, but your own hope, the hope that she will restore what was lost, bring back the gardens that were destroyed, heal the hurts that time has inflicted upon the growing world. But her healing would be the death of all else that lives beneath the sun." The Entwife's glowing eyes flickered with something that might have been doubt. "And what healing do you offer, daughter of two worlds? What hope for the green and growing things that have suffered under the axes and fires of the younger races?" "The hope of balance," Silviana replied, stepping closer, though the other tree women began to converge upon the clearing. "The hope that forest and field might coexist, that the works of hands and the works of root might both flourish under the same sky. She who sleeps knows only the ancient way, when the world was all wilderness. But wisdom grows as trees grow, with time and careful tending." For long moments, the Entwife stood silent, her form shifting and changing as if she wrestled with herself. Finally, she spoke again, and her voice carried a sadness deep as winter. "You speak fair words, tree speaker, but words are wind. If you would pass, you must prove your worth by deed. The forest will test you, as it tests all who would reach the heart tree. Survive its trials, and we shall not hinder your path. Fail, and become part of the forest's memory forever." With those words, she and her companions faded back into the shadows, leaving the 5 travelers alone in the circle of stone. But as they prepared to continue their journey, the very air around them began to change, taking on a quality that was both more and less than real. "The test begins," said Saruman quietly. "Stay close together, and remember, in the trials that come, not all that you see will be true, but all that you feel will be real. The forest tests not the body, but the spirit, and in the deep places of the heart, all lies are laid bare." Deeper into the heart of Fangorn they traveled, following paths that seemed to shift and change even as they walked upon them. The trees grew larger and more ancient with each mile, their trunks so vast that entire companies of riders might have sheltered within their shadows. Moss hung like burial shrouds from branches that seemed to reach toward the very dome of the sky, and strange lights flickered in the distance, dancing between the boles like will-o'-the-wisp. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their own footfall and the occasional creak of ancient wood. Even Maglor, whose voice had once echoed through the halls of Nargothrond, spoke in whisper, as if afraid to disturb whatever powers dwelt in this place. It was near what they judged to be midday, though the sun was only a memory beneath the thick canopy, when they came upon the Grove of Whisper. Here, The trees formed a perfect circle around a clearing carpeted with flowers that bloomed in impossible colors. Silver roses that chimed like tiny bells, golden poppies that glowed with their own inner light, and violets so dark they seemed to hold fragments of the night sky within their petals. But it was not the flowers that gave the grove its name. From every tree, from every branch and twig and leaf, came voices, soft, seductive, speaking words that tugged at the very roots of memory and desire. "Welcome, wanderers," whispered the voices, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Rest here a while, and let us sing to you of all that was and might yet be." Maglor stopped at the grove's edge, his face pale with recognition and something approaching fear. "This is the place," he said quietly. "This is where the test begins in earnest. Do not listen to the voices, no matter how sweet they seem. They will show you visions of your heart's desire, but to follow them is to lose yourself forever in dreams." But even as he spoke, the whispers grew stronger, more insistent, weaving themselves into melodies that spoke to each traveler's soul in its own tongue. To Mithrella's, they sang of glory restored, of the white city rising again in splendor, greater than ever it had known, with herself seated upon a throne of ivory and gold, beloved of her people and feared by her enemies. She saw herself leading great armies against the darkness, her sword blazing with light that could cleave shadow itself. To the daughter of Nimrodel, the voices wove visions of the gray havens made new, of ships returning from the uttermost west, bearing all those who had passed into the far country. She saw her mother walking again upon the shores of Middle-earth, saw the Eldar returning in hosts to reclaim their ancient kingdom, saw herself reunited with all those she had loved and lost. To Saruman, the whispers spoke of redemption complete, of power restored but guided by wisdom rather than pride. He saw himself as he had been meant to be, Saruman the White in truth, guardian of the free peoples, respected and honored for his knowledge and his service to the light. And to Silviana, to her, the voices sang the sweetest song of all. They showed her a world where every tree was sacred, where no axe bit bark without permission, where the green world and the world of speaking creatures dwelt in perfect harmony. She saw herself as the bridge between them, beloved of both, keeper of the balance that would endure until the ending of the world. One by one, the travelers began to drift toward the grove, their eyes glazed with wonder at the visions that danced before them. One by one, they stepped among the impossible flowers, drawn by voices that promised everything their hearts had ever desired. But as Silviana's foot touched the edge of the circle, the trees around her seemed to lean inward, their whispers growing urgent, desperate. "Wait," they seemed to say. "Wait, daughter of earth and sky. Look closer. See what lies beneath the sweetness of the dream." And in that moment of hesitation, Silviana saw through the glamour to the truth beneath. The flowers were beautiful, yes, but they grew from soil enriched by the bones of countless travelers who had entered the grove and never emerged. The trees that whispered so sweetly were draped not with moss, but with the remnants of clothing, the fragments of weapons, the pitiful possessions of those who had chosen dream over reality. "Stop!" she cried, her voice ringing clear through the grove. "It is illusion, all of it. See with your true eyes." Her companions halted as if awakening from sleep, the visions flickering and fading around them. Maglor shook his head, like one emerging from deep water, his hand instinctively reaching for his harp. Mithrella's drew her sword, its blade gleaming with clean light that drove back the shadows of false promise. The daughter of Nimrodel pressed her hands to her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks, as the vision of her mother's return dissolved into mist. But it was Saruman who suffered most from the shattering of the dream. He fell to his knees at the grove's edge, his face twisted with anguish as the vision of his redemption crumbled into dust. "Why?" he whispered, his voice broken with grief. "Why show me hope if it was only to take it away?" Silviana knelt beside him, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "Because hope without truth is merely another chain," she said softly. "The grove offers what we desire most, but at the cost of everything we are. True redemption cannot be given in a vision. It must be earned through deeds done in the waking world. Slowly, painfully, Saruman rose to his feet. When he looked at her, his eyes held a depth of understanding that had not been there before. "You speak wisdom, Tree Speaker, and perhaps that is redemption enough for now, to know the difference between the true path and the easy one." As they turned to leave the grove behind, the whispers rose to a crescendo of rage and loss, but the voices had lost their power over them. They walked on into the deeper forest, leaving the impossible flowers to bloom for other travelers, other dreamers who might not be strong enough to choose reality over desire. Behind them, the grove fell silent, waiting with infinite patience for the next company of wanderers to stumble into its embrace. But ahead lay trials greater still, for they had passed only the first test of the forest, and the heart tree remained many miles distant, and with each step they took toward their goal, the earth beneath their feet trembled more strongly, and the very air grew thick with the stirring of a power that had slept since the elder days. In the deep places of the forest, something vast and ancient was beginning to wake, and its dreams were spilling over into the waking world, bringing changes that would shake the very foundations of Middle-earth. Beyond the Grove of Whisper, the forest changed again, becoming, if possible, even stranger and more perilous than before. The trees here grew so closely together that their roots formed a vast web above the forest floor, creating tunnels and chambers in a network that seemed to extend in all directions. Some passages were large enough for riders to pass through, others barely wide enough for a single person to squeeze between the gnarled wooden wall. "The labyrinth of roots," Saruman said grimly as they stood at its entrance, a great archway formed by the intertwining of two ancient oaks. "I have heard tell of this place in the oldest writings, but I never thought to see it with my own eyes. Here, the very trees form a maze that defies all natural law." The air within the labyrinth was thick and green, heavy with the scent of earth and growing things. Phosphorescent fungi provided a dim, unearthly light that cast strange shadows on the wooden walls. The silence was absolute, as if the maze itself absorbed all sound, leaving them in a bubble of quietude that was both peaceful and deeply unsettling. They had walked for perhaps an hour along the winding passages when they encountered the first of the maze's guardian. It appeared suddenly before them as they rounded a corner, a figure that seemed at first to be a man, but as their eyes adjusted to the strange light, they saw that it was formed entirely of interwoven roots and vines, shaped into human form, but clearly other than mortal. "Who walks in the sacred maze?" it asked, its voice like the whisper of wind through autumn leaves. "What purpose brings you to the deep places where the trees hold counsel?" Silviana stepped forward, showing no fear, though the others reached for their weapon. "I am she who speaks with tree," she said clearly. "I seek the heart tree, that I might commune with she who sleeps beneath the roots of the world." The guardian studied her with eyes that were hollow spaces, filled with crawling moths. And when it spoke again, its voice carried a note of ancient sorrow. "Many have sought the heart tree, daughter of two worlds. Few have found it, and fewer still have returned to speak of what they discovered there. The maze will test your purpose, your resolve, and the truth that lies in the deepest chambers of your heart. Are you prepared for such testing?" "I am," Silviana replied, though her voice carried a tremor that suggested she knew not what she faced. "Then enter, and let the roots guide your path. But know this, the maze has its own will, and it may choose to reveal truths you would rather leave hidden. In this place, all secrets are laid bare, and all lies crumble to dust." With those words, the guardian stepped aside, its form dissolving back into the walls of root and vine from which it had emerged. The passage beyond lay open before them, curving away into green-lit darkness. As they walked deeper into the labyrinth, the passages began to branch and divide, offering choices at every turn. Some paths sloped downward into earth-scented darkness. Others climbed upward toward distant lights that might have been stars or mere phosphorescence. The walls themselves seemed to shift and change when they were not directly observed, passages appearing where none had been before, familiar routes becoming foreign territory. It was Maglor who first noticed that they were no longer alone in the maze. Shadows moved in the peripheral passages, shapes that might have been people or might have been tricks of the strange light. Sometimes they caught glimpses of familiar faces in the distance, friends long dead, enemies from ages past, figures from dreams and memory walking the root-walled halls. The maze shows us echoes, the daughter of Nimrodel observed, her voice hushed with wonder and fear. Echoes of our own lives, perhaps, or of possibilities that never came to pass. Indeed, as they progressed, the glimpses became clearer and more persistent. Mithrellas saw herself as she might have been, a simple woman of Gondor, wife to a merchant, mother to children, living a quiet life unmarked by the weight of destiny. The vision was so peaceful, so ordinary, that tears started in her eyes at its beauty. Saruman saw himself in the gardens of Isengard, as they had been in his youth, when he had first come to Middle-earth full of hope and purpose, before pride and the desire for power had corrupted his mission. He walked among flowering trees and gentle stream, teaching young students the lore of growing things, content in wisdom and service. But it was the vision that appeared to Silviana that shook her most deeply. She saw herself as a child, running through gardens that seemed to stretch to the very edges of the world, laughing with companions whose faces were beautiful beyond mortal measure. And behind her ran another child, a girl with hair like flame and eyes like starlight, calling her name with a voice like silver bells. "Sister!" cried the vision. "Wait for me!" Silviana stopped so suddenly that the others nearly collided with her, her face white with shock and recognition. "What is it?" Mithrellas asked urgently. "What do you see?" But Silviana could not answer, for the vision had revealed a truth she had hidden even from herself. The child with flame-red hair was no mere memory or dream. It was she who slept beneath the roots, she who even now stirred toward waking. And the garden where they played was not of Middle-earth at all, but of that place beyond the circles of the world, where dwelt powers older than Arda itself. "You remember now," came a voice from the walls around them, gentle yet inexorable as the turning of season. "You remember what you were before you chose to forget, before you bound yourself to the shapes and limits of the mortal world." The passage around them began to change, the root walls falling away to reveal a chamber vast beyond imagining. Here grew the heart tree itself, a tree so immense that its trunk seemed to stretch beyond sight, its roots delving down through the very foundations of the world. Its bark was silver white, smooth as polished stone, and from its branches hung leaves that gleamed like stars. But it was not the tree that drew their attention. It was the figure that sat in the hollow of its mighty trunk, wrapped in sleep so deep it seemed like death. Beautiful she was beyond all measure, with hair like flame and skin like snow, her form flickering between the shape of a woman and something far greater and more terrible. Even in sleep, power radiated from her like heat from a forge, causing the very air to shimmer and dance. And beside the tree stood another figure, one that made Silviana's heart clench with recognition and pain. Tall and graceful, with silver hair and eyes like deep forest pools, she was beautiful in the way that ancient things are beautiful, perfect, untouchable, marked by the weight of endless years. "Hello, sister," said the figure gently. "I have waited long for your return." The chamber that held the heart tree was vast beyond mortal comprehension, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to stretch toward the very stars. The roots of the great tree formed natural galleries and alcoves, carved by millennia of growth into shapes that resembled the halls of kings, yet possessed a beauty that no mortal architect could achieve. Silviana stood frozen at the chamber's threshold, her face pale with shock and dawning understanding. The figure by the tree, tall, graceful, with silver hair that caught and reflected the star gleam of the leaves above, smiled at her with infinite sadness and love. "You do not remember me, do you, sister?" the figure said, her voice like the whisper of wind through silver bell. Time and choice have clouded your memory, as you knew they would when you made your great sacrifice. Behind Silviana, her companions stood in awed silence, sensing that they witnessed something beyond their understanding. But it was Saruman who spoke first, his voice hushed with recognition. "Iwendil," he breathed, "Radagast the Brown, but changed, purified, returned to something near your original form." Beast, the figure inclined her head gracefully. "I am as I was meant to be, Kuranir, before I took the shape of the brown wizard and walked among the beasts and birds of Middle-earth. As you might have been, had pride not led you astray." There was no judgment in her words, only sorrow for what had been lost. Mithrelas stepped forward, her hand tight upon her sword hilt, though she made no move to draw the blade. "Speak plainly, spirit. We came seeking the heart tree, and she who sleeps beneath it. What part do you play in this awakening?" Radagast turned her star-bright eyes toward the sleeping figure in the tree's embrace. "I am the guardian who was set to watch, the keeper of the bonds that hold her in slumber. For 3,000 years, I have stood vigil here, waiting for the time when the choice would have to be made, to strengthen the binding or to let her wake." "And what choice have you made?" asked the daughter of Nimrodel, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have made no choice at all," Radagast replied, "for the choice was never mine to make. It belongs to her." She gestured toward Silviana, who stood as still as stone, her eyes fixed upon the sleeping figure. "It belongs to my sister, who bound herself to mortality and forgetfulness in order to understand what she could never comprehend from her place among the powers." Maglor struck a soft chord upon his harp, the melody questioning and sad. "Then Silviana is not what she seems? Not merely a woman who speaks to trees?" "She is exactly what she seems," Radagast answered. "A woman who speaks to trees, who loves the growing world with all her heart, who has lived and suffered and learned as mortals do. But she is also more than that. She is Kementari, the Earth Queen, Yavanna, the giver of fruits, the power who sang the trees into being when the world was young. Aesir." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of understanding through the chamber. Saruman's eyes widened with comprehension and something approaching awe. Mithrelas and the daughter of Nimrodel exchanged glances that spoke of pieces falling into place, of mysteries suddenly illuminated. But Silviana laughed, a sound that was part mirth and part despair. "How can I be what you say I am?" she asked, finally finding her voice. "I am mortal. I bleed. I tire. I know doubt and fear and all the weaknesses of flesh. A power of the West would be beyond such things." "Would she?" Radagast asked gently. "How can one who has never known limitation understand the need for boundary? How can one who has never felt fear comprehend the courage required to face it? How can immortal power judge the choices of mortal beings without first experiencing mortality itself?" She moved closer to Silviana, her expression infinitely compassionate. "You chose to forget, sister. You chose to bind yourself to flesh and time and all the griefs that mortals know, because only thus could you understand what your counterpart could not." She gestured toward the sleeping figure in the tree. "Yavanna the Protector, she who would reclaim all the world for the wild wood, who sees only the beauty of growth and knows not the beauty of choice freely made." Silviana stared at the sleeping figure, and now she could see the resemblance, the same face, but unmarked by mortal experience, perfect and terrible in its eternal youth. "She is me," she whispered, "and I am her, the same being, sundered by choice and purpose. The same soul," Radagast confirmed, "but changed by experience, shaped by the weight of years and the wisdom that comes only through suffering. You have learned what she could never learn, that creation is not merely about growth and abundance, but about balance, about the delicate dance between order and wildness, between the works of hands and the works of root." The sleeping figure stirred then, as if sensing the presence of her other self. Her eyes opened, and they blazed with the green fire of summer forests, terrible and beautiful beyond all measure. When she spoke, her voice was like the rumble of distant thunder, the crash of waves upon stone, the whisper of wind through endless trees. "Sister," she said, and the word carried the weight of eon. "I have dreamed such dreams in my sleep, dreams of fire and shadow, of axes biting bark, of gardens turned to wasteland. I have dreamed of the pain of growing things, and in my dreams I have wept." She rose from her resting place in the tree's embrace, and as she did, the very chamber seemed to tremble with the force of her awakening. Flowers bloomed instantly where her feet touched the ground, and the air filled with the scent of spring rain and new-turned earth. "I wake to reclaim what was lost," she continued, her eyes fixed upon some distant vision. "To heal the hurts that have been dealt to the green world, to make all Middle-earth a garden where no axe shall bite and no fire shall burn, save by my will alone. And in doing so, you would destroy everything that makes the world worth saving," Silviana said quietly. "The cities where children play in summer twilight, the fields of grain that feed the hungry, the forests that grow because people choose to plant and tend them, not because they are compelled to do so." The awakening power turned her blazing gaze upon her mortal self, and when their eyes met, the air itself seemed to catch fire. "You have been corrupted by your time among them," she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "You have forgotten the glory of the ancient days, when all the world was garden and song. I have learned that glory without choice is meaningless," Silviana replied, standing straighter despite the overwhelming presence before her. "I have learned that a garden tended by willing hands is more beautiful than a forest grown by compulsion." For long moments, the two aspects of the same power faced each other across the chamber, while their companions watched in awed silence. Finally, the awakening Yavanna spoke again, her voice softer but no less implacable. "Then we are at an impasse, Sister Self. You would preserve the works of the short-lived one, and I would see them swept away like leaves before the storm. How shall this be resolved?" It was then that Silviana smiled, and in her smile was the wisdom of ages and the hope of youth combined. "There is a third way," she said, "a way that neither of us could have seen alone, but which becomes clear when we stand together at last." The two aspects of Yavanna stood facing each other in the heart of the great tree, power radiating from both in waves that made the very air shimmer like heat from a forge. Between them, their companions watched in tense silence, sensing that the fate of all Middle-earth hung in the balance of this confrontation. "Speak then of this third way," said the awakening power, her voice like distant thunder. "What path do you see that has been hidden from my sight?" Silviana moved closer to her immortal self, showing no fear despite the overwhelming presence that pressed against her mortal form. "You dream of the ancient days when all the world was wild," she said softly, "but I have seen the beauty that comes when wild and tame exist in harmony. I have walked in gardens where children play beneath trees they planted with their own hand. I have seen forests preserved not by compulsion, but by love, tended by those who understand their worth. See," she gestured toward their companion, who stood watching with eyes wide with wonder and fear. "Look at them, sister. See how they have risked everything to reach this place, not for their own gain, but for the hope of balance. The wizard who seeks redemption through service, the warriors who fight not for conquest, but for protection, the musician whose songs preserve the memory of beauty even in the darkest hours." The immortal Yavanna turned her blazing gaze upon the mortal, and for a moment her expression softened, as if seeing them truly for the first time. "They are more than I remembered," she admitted, her voice uncertain. "In my dreams of fury, I saw only the axes and the fires, the scars upon the earth where forests once stood proud. I did not see the hands that plant new trees, the hearts that mourn for what is lost. Because you have known only protection and nurturing," Silviana explained, "you have never needed to choose between competing goods, never had to weigh the value of one life against another. That is why I accepted mortality, to learn what you could not learn from the circles of the world. Radagast stepped forward then, her transformed beauty shining like starlight in the green-lit chamber. "The binding weakens whether we will it or not," she said urgently. "Already the power spills out into the world above. If no choice is made soon, the awakening will be wild and uncontrolled, bringing chaos rather than renewal." As if to emphasize her words, a deep rumbling arose from the earth beneath their feet, and several of the mighty roots that formed the chamber's walls cracked and shifted. In the distance, they could hear the sound of trees groaning and swaying, though no wind moved their branches. "Then, what do you propose?" asked the immortal Yavanna, her attention returning to her mortal self. "How can we resolve what seems irreconcilable?" Silviana smiled, and in her smile was the peace of one who has found the answer to a riddle that has long tormented her. "We become one again," she said simply, "but not as we were before. We unite as something new, a power who understands both the wild glory of untrammeled growth and the quiet beauty of chosen harmony. A guardian who can guide rather than compel, who can teach rather than force." The immortal Yavanna's eyes widened with understanding and something that might have been hope. "A synthesis," she breathed. "Not the ancient way or the new way, but a path that honors both. But the cost will be great," Silviana acknowledged. "I will cease to be as I am, the mortal woman who has walked among trees and learned their secret. You will cease to be as you are, the power who dreams only of endless forests. We will become something neither of us has been before." Mithrellas stepped forward, her voice tight with concern. "And if this joining goes wrong? If the synthesis fails? Then both aspects may be lost," Radagast said quietly. "And with them, any hope of balance between the wild world and the world of civilization. It is a great risk, perhaps the greatest ever attempted by one of the powered." Saruman, who had listened in silence through this exchange, finally spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of hard-won wisdom. "All great choices carry great risks," he said. "I learned that truth too late to save myself from my first great error, but perhaps it is not too late to stand witness to a greater choice made with clearer sight." The immortal Yavanna looked around the chamber, taking in the faces of those who had come so far to reach this place. When her gaze returned to Silviana, it held a depth of resolve that had not been there before. "You have learned much in your mortal years, sister self. Perhaps it is time for me to learn as well. If you are willing to sacrifice what you have been for what we might become, then I too will make that sacrifice. The choice must be made freely by both aspects," Radagast warned. "Any compulsion, any reservation will twist the joining and corrupt the result. Are you both certain of your will?" Silviana nodded without hesitation. "I am certain. The world needs not the old Yavanna or the mortal Silviana, but something that can bridge the gap between them, something that can speak to tree and man alike, that can guide without commanding, protect without destroying." The immortal Yavanna was slower to respond, her blazing eyes distant as she contemplated all that the joining would mean. Finally, she too nodded, though her voice carried echoes of ancient sorrow. "I am certain, though it means the ending of what I have been since the music of creation, I choose this path. For perhaps in ending, we begin something greater." As the two aspects of the same power reached toward each other, their companions stepped back, sensing the magnitude of what was about to transpire. The very air in the chamber began to thrum with energy, and the heart tree's star-bright leaves rustled, though no wind stirred them. But as their hands were about to touch, a new voice echoed through the chamber, cold, mocking, filled with malice that had festered in darkness for ages beyond count. "How touching," it said, and with the words came shadows that should not have been able to exist in that place of light and life. "But did you truly think you could achieve such a transformation without opposition? Did you think that all who dwell in darkness would simply stand aside and let you remake the world according to your will?" From the deepest shadows between the roots emerged a figure that made even the immortal Yavanna step back in alarm. Tall and terrible it was, cloaked in darkness that seemed to drink light itself, its face hidden beneath a hood that revealed only burning eyes like stars in the void. "I name myself the last of the fallen," it said, its voice like the whisper of winter wind through dead leaves. "I who was cast down with my master in the elder days, who has waited through all the long years for a chance at revenge. And now, when the powers seek to change the very nature of the world, I claim my right to oppose them." The appearance of the last of the fallen transformed the sacred chamber in an instant. Where before there had been only the green gold light of the heart tree and the gentle phosphorescence of growing things, now shadows crept along the walls like living things, and the air itself grew cold, despite the presence of two aspects of Yavanna. Mithrelas drew her sword, its blade blazing with clean light that drove back the creeping darkness, while the daughter of Nimrodel began to sing in the ancient tongue, her voice weaving patterns of protection around their company. Maglor struck a chord upon his harp that rang like a challenge, the music clashing against the oppressive presence of the shadow-cloaked figure. But it was Saruman who surprised them all, stepping forward to place himself between the Fallen One and the two aspects of Yavanna, his form straightening as power long dormant began to kindle within him once more. "I know you, shade of ancient malice," he said, his voice carrying echoes of the authority he had once wielded. "You are Austin Aer, the fortress of the sea, first among the fallen, after your master's defeat. I thought you had perished in the ruin of Numenor." The shadowy figure laughed, a sound like breaking glass and dying hope. "Perished? Nay, Kurunir the fool, I endured, as hatred always endures. I sank beneath the waves when the star-shaped isle was broken, and in the deeps I waited, gathering strength from the darkness of the ocean floor. When Sauron fell and his power was scattered, I felt the tremor of it even in my watery prison, and I knew that the time of my release was at hand." The last of the fallen raised one shadow-wrapped hand, and the very roots of the heart tree began to writhe and twist, as if in pain. "For ages beyond count I have dreamed of this moment," it continued, its burning eyes fixed upon the two aspects of Yavanna. "When the powers would seek to meddle once more in the affairs of the world, giving me the chance to corrupt their great work from within." "What would you have?" asked the immortal Yavanna, her voice terrible in its controlled fury. "What bargain would you strike, creature of darkness?" "No bargain," the Fallen One replied with evident satisfaction. "Only the promise of chaos. You seek to join your two selves into something new, something balanced between wild and tame. I offer a third element to your synthesis, the hunger for destruction that dwells in the heart of all creation, the shadow that gives meaning to the light." Silviana stepped closer to her immortal self, and as she did, the two began to glow with a light that was neither entirely earthly nor entirely divine. "You cannot force your way into our joining," she said firmly. "Such a synthesis requires willing participants, and we will never willingly accept the corruption you offer." "Will you not?" The shadow figure raised its other hand, and suddenly the chamber was filled with visions, not the sweet illusions of the Grove of Whisper, but harsh images drawn from memory and prophecy alike. They saw the wars that would come if the balance failed, forests marching like armies to consume the works of civilization, cities burning as their inhabitants fled before the advancing green tide. They saw the peoples of Middle-earth turned against each other, elf fighting man, dwarf battling hobbit, all order dissolved in the chaos of competing need. "This is what your precious balance will bring," the Fallen One hissed. "Conflict without end, as wild and tame struggle for dominance, with neither able to claim victory. Better the clean darkness I offer, the peace of endings, the rest that comes when all striving ceases." But even as the visions played out around them, Radagast stepped forward, her transformed beauty shining like a beacon in the encroaching gloom. "You show only one possible future, Shadowspawn," she said calmly. "But futures are not fixed. They are shaped by the choices we make in each moment. Yes, there may be conflict as balance is sought, but there may also be growth, learning, the the slow development of wisdom. She gestured toward their mortal companion, who stood firm despite the terror that the fallen ones sought to inspire. Look at them, beings who have already learned to balance competing need, to find harmony between different ways of life. The wizard who seeks redemption through service rather than power. The warriors who fight not for conquest, but for protection. The musician who preserves beauty even in the face of darkness. They are proof that your vision of inevitable chaos is false. The last of the fallen snarled, its form seeming to expand and darken as its rage grew. Pretty words from the transformed guardian, but words are wind, and I deal in certainties. Observe the certainty of despair. It raised both hands, and from the deepest shadows came other figures, spirits of malice and discord that had followed their master up from the ocean deeps. They surrounded the company like a tide of darkness, their whispers filling the air with promises of futility and defeat. But as they closed in, something unexpected happened. The two aspects of Yavanna, instead of retreating, moved closer together, their hands finally touching despite the chaos around them. The moment their fingers met, light blazed through the chamber, not the harsh glare of naked power, but the warm radiance of growing things, of sunrise over green fields, of hope renewed in the darkest hour. "You are too late, creature of the deep," said a voice that was neither Sylviana's nor the immortal Yavanna's, but something that contained both, and was greater than either. "The joining has begun, and your shadows cannot touch what is born from willing sacrifice." The light spread outward from the joined figure, and where it touched the shadow spirits, they dissolved like mist before the morning sun. Even the last of the fallen staggered backward, its form wavering as the radiance struck it. "Impossible!" it shrieked. "The synthesis cannot be complete. There has been no time for the proper ritual, the careful preparations that such a joining required." "Time is a mortal concern," replied the voice of the joining Yavanna, and now the two figures were beginning to merge, their separate forms blending into something new and strange and beautiful. In the deep places of the heart, all moments are one moment, all choices the same choice. We chose this path before time began, and we choose it again, in this eternal now. The last of the fallen made one final attempt to disrupt the synthesis, pouring all its accumulated malice into a blast of pure darkness that should have shattered any mortal will. But the joining was protected by more than power. It was shielded by the love of their companion, by Saruman's hard-won wisdom, by Maglor's song of hope, by the courage of warriors who had faced darkness before and not despaired. The shadow blast struck the barrier of their combined will and shattered like a wave against unshakable stone. With a scream of rage and defeat, the last of the fallen began to fade, its form unraveling as the light of the synthesis stripped away the hatred that had sustained it through the long years. "This is not the end," it gasped as it dissolved. "Others will come. Others will seek to corrupt what you have built. The shadow endures, as does the light," replied the voice of the new Yavanna, now fully formed as the synthesis reached completion, and choice and hope and the endless possibility of growth toward something better. Where two figures had stood moments before, now there was one, but what a one! Neither fully mortal nor entirely divine, the new Yavanna bore elements of both her aspects woven into something unprecedented in the history of Middle-earth. Her hair flowed like silver water shot through with flame. Her eyes held the deep green of ancient forests, tempered with the warm brown of fertile earth. And her form seemed to shift subtly between human and something vaster, more fundamental. The chamber around them had changed as well. Where before the heart tree had stood alone in solemn majesty, now it was surrounded by a garden that seemed to contain every growing thing that had ever flourished under sun or stars. Yet this was no wild tangle. It was clearly tended, shaped by loving hands and wise understanding into patterns that spoke to both the eye and the heart. "It is done," said the new guardian, her voice carrying harmonies that spoke to each listener in their own tongue. "The synthesis is complete, and I am changed. I am as I was, yet not as I was. I am as I was not, yet true to what I have always been." Radagast stepped forward, her star-bright form flickering between her transformed state and something even more luminous. "The binding is broken," she observed, wonder and relief mingling in her voice. "Yet the power does not run wild." "How?" The new Yavanna smiled, and in her smile was all the warmth of summer noon and the gentle coolness of morning dew. "Because I have learned choice, dear guardian. I have learned that true power lies not in compulsion, but in offering, not in forcing growth, but in providing the conditions for it to flourish freely. The trees of Middle-earth will grow where they will, tended by those who love them, not commanded by one who sees only her own vision of perfection." She turned to address their companion, who stood watching in awed silence. "You have all played your part in this transformation," she said. "Each of you contributed something essential to the synthesis: wisdom, courage, hope, the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than yourself. The world will be changed by what we have accomplished, but it will be a change that honors both wild and tame, growth and cultivation, the ancient ways and the paths yet to be discovered." Saruman bowed deeply, his face shining with a peace he had not known for centuries. "What would you have of us now, lady? How shall we carry word of this transformation to the world above?" "By living it," the new Yavanna replied simply. "By returning to your homes and your peoples and showing them that balance is possible, that cooperation between the works of nature and the works of civilization can bear fruit beyond what either could achieve alone." She gestured, and the air shimmered around each of them, revealing glimpses of the futures that lay before them. Saruman saw himself walking the roads of Middle-earth, not as a conqueror or schemer, but as a teacher and healer, helping communities find harmony between their needs and the needs of the wild things around them. His knowledge of growing things, so long corrupted by the desire for power, would be turned to helping rather than controlling. Mithrellas saw herself returning to Gondor, but not to claim a throne or lead armies. Instead, she would work with King Elisar to establish new forests and gardens, to create spaces where the wild and the tame could flourish side by side, each enriching the other. The daughter of Nimrodel saw herself walking between the lands of elves and men, teaching songs that could soothe the wounds left by centuries of mistrust, helping each people understand the gifts the other had to offer. And Maglor saw himself finally laying down the burden of his ancient grief, his music becoming a bridge between the fading elder days and the age of men that was dawning, preserving memory while celebrating new possibilities. "But what of the darkness?" asked Mithrellas, remembering the words of the defeated fallen one. "Others will come, as that shadow promised. Other powers of discord will seek to upset the balance you have created." The new Yavanna nodded gravely. "They will indeed. Balance is not a destination, but a journey. Not a fixed state, but a constant choosing. There will always be those who prefer the chaos of eternal conflict or the sterility of perfect order to the challenging beauty of dynamic equilibrium. But," she smiled again, and this time her expression held both sorrow for what must be faced and joy for what could be achieved. "But they will not face the efforts of one power alone. They will face communities, peoples who have learned to work together, who have discovered that their differences are strengths rather than weaknesses. They will face the combined wisdom of tree and stone, of field and forest, of all who choose growth over stagnation, hope over despair." As she spoke, the garden around them began to change, paths appearing that led in all directions from the heart. Some wound upward toward the surface world, others delved deeper into the mysteries of root and earth, and still others seemed to lead toward distant lights that might have been stars or cities or dreams made manifest. "These paths will take you where you need to go," the new Yavanna explained. "But before you depart, know this: you will not go alone. The synthesis has opened new connections between all growing things and all those who tend them. Wherever you travel, wherever you work, you will have allies you have not seen, helpers you have not met, strength drawn from sources you never imagined." Radagast stepped forward one final time, her form beginning to fade as her long guardianship came to an end. "My vigil is complete," she said, satisfaction and sadness mingling in her voice. "For 3,000 years I have watched and waited, and now I can rest, knowing that what I guarded has been transformed into something greater than what it was." "Not rest," the new Yavanna corrected gently. "Change, transform. Take your place in the wider symphony of growth and becoming. Your task as guardian may be finished, but your role in the great work is just beginning." As the light around Radagast grew brighter, they could see her true form revealed at last. Not the brown wizard of birds and beasts, but Iwendil, the lover of birds, one of the Maiars sent to guard and guide the free peoples of Middle-earth. Her mission finally fulfilled in the way it was meant to be from the beginning. With a sound like silver bells and running water, she dissolved into light that spread throughout the garden, touching every leaf and flower, every blade of grass and grain of earth, blessing them with the gift of her long service and her joy in its completion. The paths from the Heart Tree led the company through wonders that defied mortal understanding. They walked through caverns where crystals sang with the voices of deep waters, across bridges woven from living vines that spanned chasms filled with starlight, and through groves where the trees themselves glowed with inner fire that harmed nothing but illuminated everything. Yet, for all the marvels they witnessed, their thoughts remained fixed upon what they had seen in that sacred chamber, the birth of something entirely new in the history of Middle-earth, a synthesis of wild and tame that might, if tended carefully, grow into a harmony that would endure long beyond the fading of their own brief lives. The path that Silviana's mortal companions followed led steadily upward, and after what seemed like hours, but might have been days or moments, for time moved strangely in that place between root and sky, they emerged at last into the ordinary light of a Middle-earth morning. They stood at the edge of Fangorn Forest, but not where they had entered. The trees here were different, still ancient, still possessed of the deep wisdom that marked the old growth, but somehow more welcoming, less remote from the concerns of smaller folk. Birds sang in the branches with unusual sweetness, and flowers bloomed in clearing where none had grown before. "The change has already begun," Saruman observed, his voice filled with wonder. She spoke truly. The synthesis affects not just the Heart Tree, but all the growing world. As if summoned by his words, figures began to emerge from the forest depths. Ents came first, their bark-like faces creased with expressions that might have been smile, their slow voices raised in something that was almost song. Behind them came other denizens of the deep woods, the Entwives, who had been thought lost forever, strange and beautiful creatures of vine and leaf who moved with the grace of dancers. Whom, rumbled Treebeard, the oldest of the Ents, as he approached their small company. "Much has changed in the deep places, hasty folk. Much has changed indeed. We feel it in root and branch and sap and bark. The Great Awakening has come at last, but not as we expected, not as any expected." One of the Entwives glided forward, her form shimmering between woman and willow. "She who was lost has returned," she said, her voice like wind through summer leaves. "But she has returned transformed, bringing with her the wisdom of the short-lived ones and the patience of the eternal ones united in single purpose. The gardens that were destroyed may grow again, but they will grow in new ways, in harmony with all who dwell beneath the sun." Mithrelas stepped forward, her warrior's instincts alert despite the peaceful scene. "What of the world beyond the forest? What changes will the peoples of Middle-earth see? Come and observe for yourselves," suggested another voice, and they turned to see a figure approaching through the trees. Not an Ent or Entwife, but a man of Rohan, his green cloak marking him as one of the forest watchers who guarded the borders of the Mark. "Elfhelm sends word," the messenger continued as he drew near. "Strange tidings have come from all corners of Middle-earth. In Gondor, the White Tree has suddenly burst into bloom as never before, its flowers so bright they can be seen from leagues away. In the Shire, Gardens are growing with such abundance that the hobbits speak of miracles. Even in far Erebor, the dwarves report that their deepest minds echo with sounds like growing roots and flowing water. He paused, his expression troubled and wondering in equal measure. "But strangest of all, my lord," he said, addressing Saruman with respect that would have been unthinkable only days before, "are the reports from all the lands where forests and fields meet. Farmers speak of their crops growing in harmony with wild plants that should compete with them, of fruit trees that bear twice their normal harvest, while providing shelter for countless birds and beasts. It is as if the old enmity between wild and tame is ending," Saruman finished quietly, "as if a new understanding is spreading like seeds on the wind, taking root wherever they fall." The daughter of Nimrodel raised her face to the sky, where clouds were gathering with unusual swiftness, heavy with the promise of rain. "She sends her blessing," she said softly. "The new Yavanna waters the earth with her joy, and all growing things respond to her call. This is but the beginning. In the days to come, we will see wonders that would have been impossible under the old dispensation." As if to emphasize her words, the first drops of rain began to fall, but this was no ordinary precipitation. Each droplet seemed to carry within it a spark of the green fire they had witnessed in the chamber of the heart tree, and where the rain touched the earth, new growth sprang up with miraculous speed. Not the chaotic tangle that might have been expected from such rapid growth, but careful patterns that spoke of intelligence and purpose behind their formation. Vines wove themselves into living walls that would provide windbreaks for exposed fields. Trees arranged themselves in groves that would offer shade in summer and shelter in winter. Flowers bloomed in spiral and stars and other shapes that pleased the eye while serving the needs of bees and butterflies. "We should return to our people," Maglor said, though his voice carried regret at leaving such wonders behind. "They will need guidance to understand what is happening, help to adapt to the changes that are coming." "Yes," agreed Mithrellis, though she too seemed reluctant to depart. "But we carry with us more than mere news. We carry the memory of what we have witnessed, the knowledge that balance is possible, the hope that the age beginning may be greater than any that has come before." As they prepared to take their leave of the forest and its guardians, Saruman turned back one final time toward the depths where they had witnessed such marvel. "Will we see her again?" he asked. "The new guardian, will she walk among us as Silviana once did?" The Entwife who had spoken before smiled, an expression that transformed her bark-like features into something approaching human warmth. "She is always among you," came the reply, "in every seed that sprouts, every flower that blooms, every choice made in favor of growth over destruction. She has become part of the world itself, woven into the very fabric of what is and what might yet be. Look for her not in a single form, but in the endless forms that life takes when given the freedom to flourish." With those words echoing in their minds, the four companions turned their backs on Fangorn and began their journey home, carrying with them the seeds of a transformation that would reshape Middle-earth in ways both subtle and profound. Behind them, the forest sang with voices that had been silent for ages, while above them, the rain continued to fall, blessing the earth with possibilities beyond imagination. 20 years had passed since the great synthesis in the Heart Tree, and Middle-earth had indeed been transformed, though not in ways that any single observer could have predicted. The changes had come gradually, like the growth of a great tree, imperceptible from day to day, but undeniable when seen across the span of seasons and years. In Minas Tirith, King Elisar walked through gardens that had become the wonder of the age. Here, ancient stone and living wood had found harmony, with towers that were half-built and half-grown, their walls incorporating living trees whose roots strengthened the foundations, while their branches provided cooling shade. The white tree at the city's heart had indeed grown magnificent beyond all imagining, its silver bark and star-like flowers visible from the distant borders of Gondor, but it no longer stood alone. It was the center of a grove that included saplings sent as gifts from every corner of Middle-earth, each tended with love and growing in patterns that spoke of design, guided by wisdom, both ancient and new. "The delegations are arriving, my lord," reported Faramir, approaching the king through paths lined with flowering hedges that had arranged themselves into living gallery. Representatives from Rohan and the Mark, from the Woodland Realm and Lothlorien, from Erebor and the Iron Hill. Even the Shire has sent a company, though they complain mightily about leaving their gardens at such a time of year. Elisar smiled, his weathered face showing the contentment of a man whose greatest dreams had been surpassed by reality. "They come to see with their own eyes what they have heard in reports that seem too wondrous to believe," he said. "The first council of the new growth. Who would have thought, in the dark days of the Ring War, that we would live to see such time?" The great assembly that gathered in the renovated halls of Minas Tirith was indeed unprecedented. Elves sat beside dwarves,